need to remember that even where there is a human element regarding a particular figure that is regarded highly in the Gnostic, in the theosophical tradition, the rule is pretty much that we are dealing with a figure which maybe at one time had a human embodiment, a human association, but that has become what in Jung's psychology nowadays we call an archetype. And once it becomes that, then we are really dealing with a psychospiritual reality rather than with a historical or quasi-historical figure. Now, as you may have recalled from our earlier talks this month, we have stated, and I think quite accurately, that the figure which is central to the Sophia mythos of the Gnostics, to our knowledge, has never appeared in an embodied human form. But it has appeared, and it does appear to this day, in a spiritual form. Now, this being the case, we also need to keep in mind that spiritual beings have talents, have capacities which we don't have. And as such, they are often what may be called shape changers. That's a shamanistic term. They appear once this way, then they appear once that way. And if you have a sufficient intuitive grasp of the situation, then you will recognize the same essence in a different shape. But if you don't, then you might be on your way of becoming bewildered. In any event, let's say the Sophia figure, which obviously was an archetypal manifestation and figure in the canon of the ancient church, both not only the Christian church, but prior to that in a more esoteric Judaism, which is known as Chokhmah, and is also embodied on a particular vessel of the tree of life. And then it has become a spiritual being that has appeared in various traditions, beginning with the Christian, and which, in spite of its, well, how should we say, in spite of its decline in publicity in more recent centuries, has nevertheless always been there and has been encountered by people with some powers of seership, and has been depicted by artists such as the great Nikolai Roerich. We have only one of his paintings, which is back there where she rides in the sky. So let us say also, if you ask any authoritative person in practically all of the present Eastern Orthodox churches, probably primarily the Russian, because of certain historical reasons, the Russian, Greek, and the Middle Eastern Orthodox churches, they all will, including the still quite sizable Orthodox Church of India, they will all admit that to them the divine Sophia is a celestial being, not your run-of-the-mill saint who has been a human being and then became a saint, but really a being coming from another reality. All right. Now, that being the case, we also need to keep in mind that now in this particular case, the archetypal feminine, as we might call it in this case, in spite of her very high status and in spite of her great relevance to the Gnostic tradition, can also be found in other personages. And that undoubtedly the most prominent, the most known worldwide, and the historically most important is the archetypal figure of the Virgin Mary, the Mother of Jesus. And I felt that it would be really not seemly to leave that extremely important figure out of our calculations when we are dealing with the manifestations of the feminine principle. But as a preface to all of this, I hasten to add that we also need to keep in mind that transcendental beings, archetypal beings, are very different in many respects from ordinary human beings like ourselves, and that therefore they can appear once in a certain association, once in another, and let's say that they never lose their shape-changing qualities. And that must be understood here too. So that I am convinced that quite a few of the apparitions, as they are called, which I don't like so much in connection with a sacred personage, it kind of reminds me of some sort of a slightly Dracula-esque person, maybe from Transylvania. No, that wasn't a bloody good joke. But in any event, this mutability needs to be recognized, because only by taking it into consideration will we be able to develop some degree of closeness with these figures, both theoretically and practically. Now, that being the case, I also need to insert at this time that the figure of the Blessed Virgin Mary, the Mother of Christ, who in the Eastern Orthodox Church in Greek is called the Theotokos, the Mother of God, and it also goes by Mater Dei in the Latin, is, let's say, an extremely important and enduring and historically influential archetype. And that therefore, if we don't pay any attention to it, if we relegate it as I thought, oh well, you know, people will come here tonight and they're going to say, oh well, my Catholic background has overtaken me and now I'm going to be preaching about the Virgin Mary. But that's not exactly true. So keep in mind that this figure, while no doubt very important in the extremely numerous Roman Catholic tradition, is equally important in the Eastern Orthodox traditions, and let us say important in its own right, in its own way. So this is not a primarily or particularly Roman Catholic issue. Now the only branches of Christendom that are not associated with this archetype are the branches of Protestant Christendom, which made a long historical campaign of getting rid of the figure of the Madonna from Christendom, and I think they have not fared terribly well with it. I would say that when you cut off one half of the transcendental and cosmic dualities from your religious imagination, you are likely thereby to maybe cut off half of your own interior life. So it's not a good thing to do. In any event, that is sort of the way we stand now. Protestant Christendom, no Madonna, no Mother of God. Roman Catholic and Orthodox Christendom, yes, definitely. Now then, the true image, I would say, or at least a true image, an informative image, that may be more informative than some of the others, however, is to be found, I think, once again, in the early Gnostic Gospels, particularly in this case in the Gospel of Philip, wherein we encounter a very portentous, albeit strange statement. And if I can recall that passage correctly, it is the one which states that there were three who walked with the Lord at all times. And they were the three Marys. That's an explanatory statement that we upon that. There were three who walked with the Lord at all times. They were Mary, his mother, Mary, his sister, and Mary, whom they called Mary, whom many called his consort, who was the Magdalene. Now, that's interesting in many ways, especially when we see that these figures, particularly the two chief ones, namely the mother, Mary the mother, the Virgin Mother, the Mother of God, and Mary Magdalene have played a very important role in biblical history, and often even since that time. Now, no further mention, at least in the canonical scriptures, is of Mary, his sister. Apparently there was a sister, but no more mention was made of her. But it is also stated, particularly by those who were writing derogatory things about the Christians and about Jesus, that that Jesus, like other spiritual teachers, was generally pretty much surrounded by women. Now, you might ask, if that is the case, then how come that the apostles were all men? Well, I don't know. You got to ask the apostles themselves. But obviously, while we don't hear about his sister, but especially when we come to the subsequently ill-treated Gnostic scriptures, we find at least one who very much can be reckoned as a kind of an apostle, and who actually has in some obscure contemporary writings been called in Latin the Apostola Apostolorum, the apostle to the apostles, and that was Mary Magdalene. So let us say, I don't think we can accuse the early Christian communities of having been sexist, but we also need to remember that they carried on their activities in culture that was very masculine oriented, the Jewish culture and other Middle Eastern cultures, and therefore some of these data are very understandable. Now, while there is no further mention of a sister, certainly the mother of Jesus is mentioned frequently. And especially when it comes to the Gnostic or Gnostic-like scriptures, then the figure of Mary Magdalene is mentioned very frequently. So then we need to perhaps keep in mind that when the statement is Mary was his mother, his sister, and the one whom they called his consort, I think thereby, perhaps as so often in religious scriptures, there may be an additional and partially hidden meaning. Now, about hidden meanings one can only conjecture by virtue of the fact that they are hidden. But what is hidden can be discovered, this can be unveiled and can be discovered. And I would say that if we look at these matters from a transcendental and archetypal point of view, then we may come to the conclusion that the feminine figures mentioned in various scriptures, Gnostic and otherwise, carry an archetypal significance with them, that they stand for more than a nice and pleasant and blessed human being, but that they stand for some transcendental realities, for some transcendental qualities, and that these will reappear at various times, not only when they are physically on earth, but subsequently and in history. And that is definitely what happened to the figure of the mother of Jesus, because she has been the most widely and most intensely revered religious figure, at least of Christendom in its history. So I don't care what John Calvin says, after all, Calvin was the original chauvinist. You know why? Because that was his real name. His name was Jean Chauvin, which is, at least until he came to assume it, was a perfectly respectable French name. But he was also, from what one can deduce from history, and I hope I'm not doing the old shyster because he was a lawyer. I hope I'm not doing him a great deal of harm or insulting him too much. But here, let's say he's the least attractive of the reformers. There's just no doubt about it. He was also quite cruel. He had his man who had been his best friend, John Servetus, burned at the stake in Geneva. And when Servetus was calling out to him, John, I'm burning, help me. Then he said, oh no, John, that is good for your soul. Oh. Now this is actual historical fact. So when you go by a Presbyterian church, or especially if you go inside, then keep that in mind, because John Calvin might be there with a torch trying to light something. Now, I think the malicious humor ought to quit now for a little while, but let us say to be really serious about it, the casting out of the religious spiritual archetypes, to use that term again, from so much of Christendom, I think was very unfortunate wherever it occurred. And on the other hand, the retention of the one great, extremely important feminine archetype, that of the Mother of Jesus, and its flowering and continued presence and activity in history, as practiced by the very numerous Roman Catholic Church and perhaps by the somewhat less numerous Orthodox Church, that these saved the day in terms of the presence of the feminine in history. Now, with that little send-off, we may need to keep in mind that what about Mary Magdalene? Well, especially in recent decades, I think we heard more about Mary Magdalene than most of us were really interested in, at least I was. But on the other hand, it has brought to attention the fact that the reverence shown to Mary Magdalene and a great deal of written material that is attributed to her statements all appeared in Gnostic scriptures. Now, I mentioned, I think, before that in the last years of the 19th century, when Madame Blavatsky was still in the flesh and in London, but not very long, that a very voluminous and extremely poetic and interesting Gnostic scripture was discovered. It was not discovered in Egypt like the Naj Hammadi library. It was discovered in the residence of a British medical doctor by the name of Dr. Askew in London. When he died, he had this old Coptic, in Sahidic, written in Sahidic Coptic, this old Coptic codex in his house. And then, of course, the scholars came to work. And it is, I think, to this day now in the British Museum. But it created quite a bit of interest then and sporadically through the ages in Mary Magdalene. And of course, a great deal of the material about Sophia, the Sophia myth of her falling through the aeons and her being rescued and her going toward the light and so forth, which we all have reviewed, are also in the book Pistis Sophia, which means really in slightly ungrammatical Greek, means Sophia the faithful. So one of our principal sources about Sophia is the Pistis Sophia, and was already at that time. I may also, if I haven't mentioned before, I may also throw into the circle the historical fact that the appearance of Pistis Sophia and its fairly quick translations one by Carl Schmitt, a German scholar, very good translation if you know German, which fortunately I do, and the other into English by Blavatsky's private secretary and close friend G.R.S. Mead, George R.S. Mead. These brought the entire subject of Sophia, and within it, in a not entirely ancillary fashion, also the figure of Mary Magdalene. Why? Because the setting, and this is sort of an antique setting that you find in ancient novels and ancient plays and things of that sort. Bunch of people are sitting together and they are discussing a subject, and then each one sort of has his or her own approach, and sometimes they argue with each other and sometimes they don't. But in this particular case, even though the chronological framework mentioned in the book is that this takes place a considerable time subsequent to Jesus' ascension, where, you know, is the crucifixion, there is the resurrection, and then there is the ascension. And once you have the ascension, then basically he ain't around anymore. But this being a spiritual assembly, he is there with the disciples, and not to continue commenting on this too much, let me say that he, for the most part, Jesus himself and some others, tell the story of Sophia, how she came from the highest heavens, how she fell, all the things, how she was rescued, and then then Jesus asks, all right, what does this mean to you? How do you understand this? Sort of indicating that, at least in the view of the Gnostics, Jesus was was not a self-important teacher like our university professors, but rather he was somebody who tried to draw out from his students their own intuition and their own knowledge, which is of course the right way to do it. Now, so he asks the people, and various people, including his mother and others, make statements, well, I understand this way, understand that way. But when Mary Magdalene speaks, her interpretations are very extensive and tremendously profound. And then she is always commended. She is always pat on the back by Jesus, saying, yes, Mary, you know, well, he doesn't use that expression, but you know where it's at, You're the real wise one, so just keep on. And so it's really the one who comes off as the most vociferous and learned in the assembly is Mary Magdalene. So let's say that brought Mary Magdalene into a considerable interest, and that interest has never really disappeared. And then, owing to all kinds of curious historical circumstances and strange works of fiction in the last few decades, there was again a kind of a revival of interest in Mary Magdalene, which so often when a subject becomes popular, it begins to lose in its veracity and its value. So I would say that anything published about Mary Magdalene, I don't know, within the last 40, 50 years, is not to be trusted, unless you need something to lull you to sleep at night. You know, it's not very much Gnostic. Holy Blood, Holy Grail, whom somebody I knew used to call Holy Blood, Holy Grail, Holy Moly. So that was probably the greatest offender in terms of all kinds of fictitious implications about Mary Magdalene, and then there were others. But some of this silliness, to a considerable extent, has subsided, except in some limited circles in recent years, and that, of course, was a good idea, and is a good idea. But now, let us say, then, a bit later, Madame Blavatsky, our great theosophical Gnostic teacher, was still alive when the Pistis Sophia was discovered, as I mentioned, and she had commented on it in her journal and in connection with J.R.S. Mead, and she even drew, if you can find it, because it has been republished, she drew a fabulous diagram, which is a diagram of the various Gnostic aeons that Sophia is coming from. All manner of little triangles coming together. I know I should not call attention to myself that much, but you know, I'm a kind of an egotistical guy, so I shouldn't regale you with personal reminiscences. Although I have one later on that's maybe much more important than this. But I was sitting on a Los Angeles RTD bus, because I never drove a car, and I never owned a computer. So that's my testimony to these things. But in any event, there I was on the bus, you know, and was looking at Madame Blavatsky's diagram, you know, with all these triangles and things, and it put me into a kind of trance, which is not exactly the most desirable condition to be in when you are on a Los Angeles bus. But so I assure you that I haven't had anything stronger inside of me than a cup of coffee. So I'm not opposed to things that you may take in that do something to your consciousness, as long as you do it knowingly and are capable of deriving some benefit from it. But I did nothing of that sort. So there I sat, and finally I came to at the end station of that bus line. I was sitting in my seat in this Blavatsky Gnostic-induced state until the bus stopped, and the bus driver said, "Come on, you gotta get off." You know, so, you know, there we were. In any event, that is not of great esoteric significance, but I think that it indicates that what Madame Blavatsky did with it is a kind of geometrical mandala. And those things do have a psychological influence, impact on just about everybody. So it's not nothing that I elevate myself for. But let us say, so then Pistis Sophia was the big source about Mary Magdalene, because virtually there wasn't anything else around. No, not Samadhi yet, nothing else. And then in the 1920s, I'm quite sure that's when it was, in Egypt, where things are often important things are often discovered, probably very largely because of the climate. Now, for instance, I because of my association with in the past with the Institute of Antiquity and Christianity in Claremont and Dr. Robinson, who was a wonderful gentleman, and so I I had a little bit of insight into these things, and so I noticed that the Dead Sea Scrolls, for instance, with which the Institute also had something, the Dead Sea Scrolls, when they were brought out of their containers, were in very bad shape. They were, I think, it's probably foaming at the mouth. In any event, the Nag Hammadi library, on the other hand, was in very good shape, because the climate in Upper Egypt is dry and warm, and the papyrus on which the books are written does not rot, and so they were in very good shape, which certainly pleased the scholars considerably. So, then in Egypt, near an ancient river which has the Greek name of Oxyrhynchus, near the Oxyrhynchus River, in the ground, they found a few codexes back in the 1920s. And they became known, because of the place of their discovery, as the Oxyrhynchus Papyrus. Now, the Oxyrhynchus Papyrus contained several pieces, and it eventually came to be known, the whole collection, the way those things are, it came to be known as let's see, the Berlin Codex, because it ended up in Berlin. And fortunately, not even Adolf Hitler did any harm to it, so it's still available. Now, a portion of the Berlin Codex, or the Oxyrhynchus Papyrus, is entitled in the very codex itself as the Gospel of Mary Magdalene. Now, it's, a gospel is not what we imagine from the New Testament, that it has to be connected with Jesus and things of that sort. But the gospel, which is an old English word, is the English translation of the Greek word evangelion, which means a happy news. A happy message. Anything that starts with EV or EU, the Omicron in Greek, means something happy. So, for instance, there is the town in Northern California where they found gold, and it's called Eureka. Eureka, it's Greek, so it's a happy exclamation. Oh, geez, we found gold, So, in any event, what the scripture that came to be called by the scholars the Gospel of Mary, but really of Gospel of Mary Magdalene, contains for the most part, is quite unusual, but it's also fragmentary, so pieces of it missing, which is always difficult, because then they rely on the ingenuity of the scholars to try to guess what was there. And let me tell you, their ingenuity is usually very disingenuous. But in any event, still they were able to piece that portion together, wherein Mary Magdalene is talking, and somebody writes it down, to the other apostles, and this the chronology is at the time when Jesus is no longer around. So it is after the ascension. And but he's talking to her. He's instructing her. She's asking him questions, all in the spirit. So it's and there, just like in the Gospel of Thomas, some of the apostles who are always jealous of Mary Magdalene. She, first of all, she's a woman. Secondly, I think she's very good looking, which they are not. bunch of old Yiddish boys, But in any event, it is of great interest because she's having a dialogue in the spirit with Jesus, and then she asks him further questions, and so it's really very beautiful and very informative as far as it goes. So that's about all we had that had a direct relationship to one of the Marys, to Mary Magdalene thereafter. Now, all right. Now we have to fall back a little bit onto tradition, which is often not a bad way to go, because when a tradition arises within a particular religious community or so, and the people who are around are interested in and they agree, then the likelihood is that the tradition originates with something true. And the tradition now is that first of all, the community was organizing, and then all the disciples and the apostles, and that's New Testament's Act of the Apostles, wherein they all came together, and that was the event of Pentecost. But it is part of the tradition. I don't think it's in the Acts of the Apostles themselves, but very much part of the tradition, and consequently has gotten a lot of the artistic depictions of the gathering of Pentecost. That here are the epistles. The epistles, well, you know that there was a kind of a jocular thing. There was a church meeting somewhere of some people who didn't know their verse terribly well, and so somebody asked them, "What is an epistle?" And they said, "The epistle is the wife of an apostle." Sorry to make you laugh with this silly thing, but it was in the papers. It was printed. But in any event, what I was alluding to was that the tradition says that the meeting of Pentecost, when they were all inspired and had the fiery tongues above their heads and so forth, the meeting of Pentecost was presided over by the Virgin Mary. So that she was considered sort of the senior wise woman in the group. And that in itself, I think, is quite significant, because all those patriarchal old Jewish guys there, all those apostles, not the epistles now, but all those apostles, they would not have accepted a woman unless they were really convinced that she was a very important woman. Then what happens? Tradition says after that the mother of Jesus wanted to absent herself from Palestine, and the two who went with her and remained with her to the end were, as you might guess it, Mary Magdalene and Saint John, the beloved disciple. And that they went to the the Grecian city of Ephesus. And to this day, even though Ephesus is now Turkey, not Thanksgiving, it's in Turkey and it's called Smyrna. Even though that is the case, there is a nice Greek-styled church there, of which I had a picture at one time, and which is the church of the Dormition of the Holy Theotokos, this is where the Mother of God went to sleep. Now, of course, there is a bit of an addition to that story, but that is the story that she went there, she was being cared for by Mary Magdalene and by St. John, the beloved disciple, and that then she went. Now, of course, this had various subsequent ideas that arose in connection with that, but let us say not too much was heard about the let's say about the spiritual future after that of the Virgin Mary until when? Until the 1940s, and my geriatric memory is rusty, but I would say it was probably 48 or 1948 or 1949, when, following an inspiration, as I was assured by some people who know about those things, Pope Pius XII solemnly proclaimed that the Blessed Virgin Mary was taken, didn't die an ordinary death, but that she was taken up to heaven and is there with her Son and with God the Father. And I, with my father and mother, was in Austria, in the Austrian Alps at that time, and we were listening to the voice of the Pope on the radio, and we were all three kneeling on the ground when that magnificent voice in Italianate Latin, nos proclamamus, declaramus et definimus. We proclaim, we declare, and we define that the Blessed Virgin Mary was taken up to heaven, bodily. Now, all right. I would say that even by the radio, it was quite an experience. Of course, Pope Pius was an experience anyway. It was a magnificent appearance. In any way, let us say then that obviously there were consequences of this. And one of the consequences was that the Protestants, including, I'm sad to say, even His Grace the Lord Archbishop of Canterbury and various others, the Protestants were horrified. How can they have this, just because she is the mother of Jesus, how can you say that she went up to heaven? Well, if you find some evidence for it, then perhaps you can. In any event, let's put it this way. There are data in the annals of psychical research where weird and unusual events are catalogued of people who seem to be dying, and then all of a sudden their body is no longer there. And they never find it. Now, I don't mean to make myself Pope, although it would be kind of fun. Rome is a heck of a nice place. But let's say, I am not arrogating to myself an authority to say that that's how it was. But let's say the disappearance and the teleportation and various other curious things that may have occurred to a body of a dead person. There are accounts of that sort of thing all over the place. If you have read some of the psychical research literature, then you will see that it is such. I think I can even come a little bit closer to it, because I had a compatriot, a friend, who then became a friend, a Hungarian psychoanalyst, personal disciple of Sigmund Freud, and that, whose name was Dr. Nando Fodor. He lived in New York once he got there. And Dr. Fodor told us two incidents in his practice which are pertinent to this. One of them was that he had a patient who kept telling him in his psychoanalytic session, there was a lady, that she would experience from time to time a tremendous explosion of heat when she was abed. And then one time she asked Dr. Fodor to come to her apartment in New York, and he saw the bed sheets singed as if an extremely hot object had been laid on them. And he said, well, you just really generated a lot of heat, dear lady, that night. And then time went on, she was still his patient, and then she didn't come anymore. And what had happened was that she disappeared from her apartment, lock, stock, and barrel, and was never found again. And not her relatives, not her family, not her friends, none of them could discover as to what became of her. And he, incidentally, Dr. Nando Fodor was also one of the leading psychical researchers in the world, written a great deal about it and so forth. And he said that he considered it a possibility, whether a likely possibility or not, that she was simply teleported into another dimension. Nobody had ever seen her again. Now, if that can happen to a nice, probably nice Jewish lady in New York in the 1940s or 1950s or something like that, who is to say that something similar could not have happened to the mother of Jesus? So, in ecclesiastical circles, we call these things miracles. In psychical research circles, we call them phenomena. But you know what? They are the same thing. They are the same thing. Weird and strange and impossible things can happen. They often, probably more often than not, happen within a religious context, but not always. And so I think that if we talk about the mode, again, the Pope obviously went by tradition, that she was completely taken up to heaven. In any event, but now what I was leading up to was that when this pronunciation, when this dogma was pronounced of the Assumption, as it is called, of the Virgin Mary. These are technical terms. Jesus ascends, but the Virgin Mary is assumed. You've got to be precise about these things, my dears. So in any event, when the news of the proclamation of the Assumption and the whole turmoil in the religious world came into the media and so forth, there was one person who was deliriously happy about it, and who said so and wrote about it. And you know who that was? Carl Gustav Jung. Because Jung saw in the proclamation and in the acceptance of the Roman Catholic Church, in this case, of the Assumption of the Virgin Mary, an archetypal event that would have very long-lasting and very important consequences. Now, I remember when I was already interested in Jungian things, and he made no bones about it, that he was extremely delighted, and more than that, that this act on the part of the head of the Roman Catholic Church would herald in, would signal the coming into existence of a historical period wherein the divine feminine would gain new recognition, and that the proclamation of her assumption into the heavens is an indication that now the feminine is in the heavens with God the Father and God the Son and God the Holy Spirit. Of course, I could have added to it, and I'm sure Jung was aware of it, that there are icons from various periods of history, Roman Catholic icons, where the Holy Spirit is depicted as a woman. Huh? Who says that the Holy Spirit cannot have a gender, you know? In any event, that's prehistory. But Jung saw this as a sort of the initial bell being rung for an important archetypal development. Now, we would be here all night, and probably in addition to that all day tomorrow, if I manage to scrape up from all the existing sources the innumerable apparitions attributed to the Blessed Mother Mary, which all would indicate that there has been, and it's been statistically proven, that especially the miraculous appearances of the Blessed Virgin, or attributed to a Blessed Virgin, sort of since the maybe the first half of the last quarter of the 19th century and the first half of the 20th century have increased immensely, way a lot more than ever before. Well, now you could come up with all kinds of excuses, but the fact of the matter is that these things, when they happen, are investigated and looked at from all kinds of angles, and all sorts of records kept because of the ever-present work of the Roman Catholic bureaucracy. So the Church's bureaucracy keeps very close eye on these things, because the miraculous events can be declared to be genuine miracles only if certain investigations have been carried on and all that sort of thing. It seems a little bit strange that within a religious setting that should take place, but I can assure you that a tremendous amount of inquiry goes into these matters. So there have been way a lot more, and if I had looked in my untidy lecture notes, I could have come up with a number, not with a number for you, but it is undoubtedly true that a very radical increase of these various usually miraculous apparitions of the lady have taken place, and that they are mounting, and some of them are within our own time. I wouldn't be surprised that if we had very great clairvoyant powers, we could discern here that right now there is an apparition of the Virgin Mary somewhere in Latin America or in the Philippines or in Europe or wherever, maybe where she is most needed, like in Ukraine or whatever, because these have definitely increased a great deal. And Jung's statement was to the effect that this announced, it heralded the coming of a new era wherein the divine feminine would become much more active and much more important than before. Now, you might say, well, good for you, Carl Jung. All I see around me is secularism and atheism and Marxism and things like that. And, where is your famous prediction? And I would say that all that is gold does not glitter, and we have to keep in mind that not all the unusual, the miraculous, the paranormal, the transcendental and spiritual events that occur in the world come to our attention. If they did, then maybe it would be an entirely different world. There would be more people who would accept them as real than there are. So maybe that's what is needed, a little more publicity for the Virgin Mary. But let us say this is undoubtedly true. So let us say this, of course, fits into a view, a worldview of Carl Jung, which he expressed in a very beautiful sentence in the Red Book. This is page 311 of the big Red Book of the Liber Novus, where he sort of stated very briefly, but very succinctly, as to what he was up to, what he was here for, what he was doing. You may think that he was here to shrink heads, but that was not his view. And this is what he wrote: to give birth to the ancient in a new time, and that is creation. This is the creation of the new, and that redeems me. And the reason that it redeems me, in other words, that people are saying that he's a kook, he's not he's not a good psychiatrist because he has visions and he talks to spirits and things like that. But so he said that this is the creation of the new, and that redeems me, in the sense he says, that's what I am doing, that's what I'm here for. And this is in the Red Book. And then the last two lines: salvation is the resolution of the task. He doesn't say what the task is, but we can conjecture that the task is the enlightenment, the illumination is the same word as enlightenment, the coming into its own of the spiritual nature of the human being, and that to facilitate that and to help it to come into being, perhaps on a worldwide basis, that is what C.G. Jung considered as his work. And then he has two more lines attached to it. Salvation is the resolution of the task. The task is to give birth to the old in a new time. And that is in Liber Novus, the Red Book, page 311. Now, that is also the explanation of his great elation and his great enthusiasm at the time of the proclamation of the dogma of the Assumption of the Virgin. Because he said this is an archetypal event. And it is believed in, and it is taken to their heart by millions of people, and that this is an extremely important matter. Now, I would say that is something to definitely to keep in mind. Now, let me see here. I have collected, probably not very adroitly, because I am not a great archivist, but I have collected instances and what appeared me to be developments in the world, in the psycho-spiritual development of people, in religion, in scholarship, over pretty much since that time period, and have found that there are developments which fall in line with that. And for instance, I think in the field of religion, what might be called the Marianic keynote, I was looking for the Marianic keynote, the Marianic keynote of respect and love for all forms of spirituality, for believers of all religions. The maternal attitude of the Madonna has come. And this has been, I think, very beneficial, although, unfortunately, when good things happen in the world, then often the opposition also raises its head. So we need to keep in mind that there is, I think, an awareness, a dawning awareness, not very great yet, but a dawning awareness of the university of the maternal feminine revelation, in this case, has happened. And that some of the big outstanding events, of course, were Fatima, some of the great miraculous events that have occurred since then, which, for instance, now again, I don't want to go into detail, but I have read enough about it, and the information is available. The miracles of Fatima in Portugal, which were witnessed by huge masses of people. I don't mean just 100 or a couple of hundred, but thousands and 10,000s, I think, indicate that there was something extremely important going on which had a physical aspect. Now, you know, the ancients, the Hermeticists and people like that, they often talked about the reality of the spirit being the heavenly man. And the heavenly man's head is beyond the sun and the moon and the stars, but his feet are down on the earth. And so, let's say, when phenomena occur that are regarded as miracles in the religious context, they could be likened, in my mind, to the feet of the heavenly man on earth. In other words, physical things will appear. The physical is not excluded from the miraculous, far from it. But it is not the only only field of the miracle. So we need to keep that in mind. In fact, and I think that many of the Marianic phenomena, the Marianic miracles bear testimony to that. That the Marianic view of life, this kind of inspiration that comes from this strange source that is identified as the Virgin Mary in her heavenly habitat, wherever it is, that these are significant indications to us to pay attention. And that perhaps we have entered, although you can't see too much evidence of it, but that we have entered the era when this particular manifestation of the divine, the Theotokos, the Gottesmutter, as we call her in German, the Mother of God, has increasingly come to manifest and has addressed herself over and over to those who were able to listen. It is also not to be discounted that there were events such as the terrible event when I well remember the day when I was in my residence here on Beechwood Drive, and I got the news, I think through the radio, that Pope John Paul has been shot in St. Peter's Square, And I had a young Jewish boy who was coming to visit me. I was sort of doing some counseling. We had a teenager. And he said, they shot the Pope. He says, but that's like killing God. I said, you know what? I think you're on the right track. So let's say, but when he came to in the hospital after tremendous amount of difficulty and suffering, then he said that the shooting occurred on the anniversary of the miracle of Fatima, of Our Lady of Fatima, and she said that I called out and Our Lady saved me. And the secretary or the priest who was with him in the car when he was shot and when his blood was pouring all over, he said, right there he was saying, Madonna, Madonna, Fatima, Fatima. So let us say there are curious developments which indicate that signs and wonders that pertain to the divine feminine, in this case to the mother of the last great messenger, are present. And that perhaps by way of their presence and their increasing presence in the world, there might be some developments in this world that will make it. Everybody always says, I want to make the world a better place. My feeling is, and maybe I'm just a little bit too too much of a Gnostic there. You are going to make this world a better place. What have you made better? Have you made your apartment better? Have you made your street better? What have you done? No, I haven't done anything. Well, maybe it's time that you start doing something. In any event, I think that there is the likelihood of a very important element, a very important figure coming through here. Now, lest you finally, when you go away from here, you say, well, I was protesting that I was not here to make Roman Catholic propaganda, and then that's what I have done. Well, let us say I have additional incidents that have come to my attention, which are not strictly within a religious or an ecclesiastical sphere, but which nevertheless point in this direction. And just to hearken back to my theosophical heritage here, in the earlier period of the theosophical movement, I would say this would sort of go into the 1920s and a little bit beyond. There were statements made by the man who really was a considerable seer, C.W. Leadbeater, and I think that Dr. Annie Besant herself, to the effect that there was a development was taking place, and that this development was a coming to a greater focus, shall we say, of what they call the world model. Now, I thought to myself, what's that? What's a world model? You know, but when I looked into, there's very little literature about it because they only talked about this for a while, and they said actually that for a period of time, and now this is history, and you can find it in some place. They said that the manifestations of the world model would be connected with, they would work through a particular person for a period of time. And this particular person was, who in the 1920s was probably very, very young, was a very young Hindu lady from the south of India. And her name was Rukmini Devi. And Rukmini Devi was from a theosophical family, and when she was still very young, she married a very prominent English theosophist, Dr. George Arundel, who was Annie Besant's successor as the international president. And they didn't say that she was the world model. They said that there was a great being that they referred to as the world. Maybe they were afraid to say the Virgin Mary. I don't know. But that for a period of time, that she would overshadow Rukmini Devi. And when you, later on, when you come closer, I have her photograph here. And then you can see this is what, as I knew her as a mature woman, because she lived for a long time. She came here many times. She spoke from here many times, and I am happy to say that we had a excellent relationship. She really, for some doggone reason, I don't know, because I'm not a likable guy, but she really liked me. And you know, there are few people in this life who I can see really liked me. She was one. Anyway, this was the person who apparently for a period of time was taken over by the World Mother. And I when I was alone with her one time, she asked him, I asked her, Rukmini, what about that World Mother stuff that I read? He says, well, we don't talk about that now anymore. But he says, you know, there are these things that sometimes happen, he says, to some of us, and let's say there were some manifestations, and I believe in them. So let's say that, and there is again, it's the coming of the feminine principle in that fashion, and I also knew somebody else who had some contact with that matrix, and sometimes mentioned the World Mother, sometimes mentioned the Madonna, and from time to time, when he was teaching us, he would indicate that this particular sentence came from a deeper source. And one of this was a man. One of the things that he said that came from the great feminine presence was the fact, he said, that let's see, how did he put it? That one of the great metaphors of life is the diamond. And he said that the diamond is the product of the earth, the coal, when something from beyond enters it. So that the diamond is a transformed, a sanctified product of the earth. And he says that is why diamonds were considered particularly sacred in various in ancient civilizations, and that we ought to remember that we are lumps of clay, but we can be, and we are destined to become diamonds, but we have to work at it. And that this was also a particular insight that came from the Great Mother. So now, let us say, I don't know, some of you probably were here a few weeks ago when we did the annual tarot spread that we always have for the year and so forth. And it was a very, very feminine picture. And it was one that gave me the impression that we were given an insight, we are given a direction that we need to be, this is difficult to tell, but let's say that we need to be more like the Virgin Mary. That as there is an imitatio Christi, the imitation of Christ, you know, a famous book written about it too, there is also, and that the imitation of the Great Mother, of the Mother of God, consists in the fact that we, wherever we are, whoever we are, and whatever gender we are, that we have to cultivate the what under other circumstances could be the maternal love for so many people, for so many things in this world. That there is, when we can do that, then we have contributed to changing the lump of earth into a diamond. And once again, I don't claim any great authority for that statement, but I have heard this said from somebody who knew a great deal, and I never forgot it, and I never will forget it either. So let's say it may well be, but I have to make this tentative, because otherwise I can see some months or years from you coming and throwing rotten tomatoes at me and things of that sort, which one does to false prophets. But I have a very strong impression, and this is coming from someone who is, well, let we say, past his time in this world, and my impressions are not all terrestrial, let's put it that way. And my impression is that to the extent that we can cultivate within ourselves and express and convey the kind of maternal, divine maternal love that has been manifest quite evidently for these many centuries in the apparitions, in the various ways in which she came, and the miracles of the Virgin Mary. If we can do that, then we can also be, this is difficult to say, but we can become like the children of the Madonna, as she gave birth to one who loved and helped and saved and brought the world into a new spiritual dispensation. So in our own way we can do that also, but we have to somehow affinitize ourselves to that maternal feminine spirit. And if we can do that, then we will contribute, I think, in a very important manner to the world. And I think the entire archetype of the Theotokos, the Mother of God, the Mater Dei, is something that we may need to think about in a very profound fashion, because we have learned, and I think correctly so, from the esoteric tradition, that the divine is not just up in the heavens, but that the divine is at least germinally, like an infant, inside of us. And that therefore, if we affinitize ourselves to that divine, if we cultivate the kindness and the goodness and the love that a mother has for her children in another manner, then we will have participated in, well, maybe what may be a Madonna age, an age of the Mother of God. And what would be the real culmination of that is when spiritually we give birth to the God within ourselves. As Angelus Silesius wrote, and I like to quote him around Christmas, whether I remember him right now or not, I don't know. For if Christ 1,000 times in Bethlehem be born, but not in you. Your soul is all forlorn. The cross at Golgotha standeth up in vain, unless in you it be erect again. So that there can be such a thing as an imitation of the Madonna, that we can spiritually give birth to something good, to something kind, to something salvific, and something spiritual. The world was always in a sad state, no matter where you look at it. You look at ancient Rome, you look at ancient Israel, you look at, there were always troubles. So we cannot use it as an excuse that this world has become so weird and so confused that it cannot be done. But that potential, let's say the Madonna potential, the Divine Mother potential is present in each and every one of us, whatever our orientation, whatever our physical gender, and it being there, we can exercise it. So I think that what I was sort of trying to bring forth with some difficulty, that we can engage in an imitation of the Divine Mother. We can engage in following her in a way that inwardly and spiritually we do what she has done. And we can bring to birth within ourselves the saving power which will inspire us, which will guide us, and which perhaps, if we are very lucky, will take us also to where she went and where she is, and from whence she has directed the coming into manifestation, the coming into birth, so much that is good, so much that is important in this world. And that maybe we need to keep in mind that we haven't been born into this, some of you into this hemisphere, some of them into Europe, but let's say into this part of the world where the Madonna has been so prominent. Historically, we have been brought close to her. We have been presented to the Great Mother, who sits above the circle of the stars, who is more radiant than the sun and more glorious than the heavenly bodies, because she has done what in another way, by imitation, we all can do. She has brought the divine into manifestation, and we can do the same. Not only can we do the same, but we must do the same. It's not a command, but it is a duty that wells up from below, a duty that if we have not attended to it, and we have not brought the old to new birth, as Jung spoke about it, then we haven't really done what we are supposed to do. We can feed the hungry, we can clothe the naked, we can pet the animals, but we have something important to do. We are here to give birth to a God who is here, knocks at the door, and says, "Come on. What do you think? What do you think you are here for, if not to help me to come forth, so that I might accomplish what I am to accomplish?" And so we are the birth givers of the saving power, potentially. And I hope that you have a feeling, at least, of that. I say this from a part of myself which is not the one that usually speaks. There's something very important that has appeared to me this evening, and it is that we can engage in an imitation of the one who gives birth to God, to the Theotokos, to the Mater Dei, to the one who brings the ineffable, the unconquerable, the marvelous, supernal light into the world, and thereby enlightens all. This was the work of the Buddhas, this was the work of the avatars, and this was the work of the Christian avatar, who was born of apparently a most unusual, most devoted, most wonderful Jewish girl who listened to the angel. And when the angel spoke to her and said, "Hail Mary," and the rest of what has become incorporated in the Ave Maria, Hail Mary, thou who art full of grace. We also can be full of grace. We have the making of the container of the grace. We are a chalice of the saving, of the redeeming grace of transcendence. And if we can get that message somehow from the strange story of the mother who gave birth, not just a child, not just a boy, but a God. If we can get a feeling of that and incorporate some of that quality into ourselves, then indeed the Blessed Mother has not been here in vain, and the ongoing, the continuous birth-giving of the God can occur, and we can be participants in it. So I hope you have compassion for me in my strange state, but I think that something very important, something extremely wonderful, something of an incredible salvific future can happen in this world if we cooperate with it, and if the God birth giver can act as our example. And so I'll conclude my ruminations, which are maybe more religious than esoteric tonight. I'll conclude them with the time-honored, ancient, wonderful mantra, Ave Maria, Ave Maria, Ave Maria. Thank you very much.